You know that feeling when everything just clicks? Your mind is sharp, your mood is steady, your body feels like it's firing on all cylinders. That's not luck, that's what your body is capable of every single day. Now, I've looked into a lot of fish oil supplements, and honestly, most of them are mystery sourced, overprocessed, blasted with heat, and packed with synthetic add-ins. But this one is different. Omega-3 Rejuvenate from Big Bold Health starts with wild Alaskan salmon and cod, sustainably caught from some of the cleanest waters on the planet, and then it's processed at low temperatures to preserve what actually matters. We're talking about real omega-3s, naturally occurring vitamins A and D, and pro-resolving mediators, or PRMs, that help your body balance its own immune response. What does that mean for you? Clearer thinking, more stable mood, and real nature-based support for your heart and immune system. No shortcuts, no synthetic nonsense. And it was developed by Dr. Jeffrey Bland, a true pioneer in the world of complementary health. If you want to feel the difference, go to bigboldhealth.com/Hoffman. That's bigboldhealth.com/Hoffman and use code Hoffman for 20% off site-wide. Once you feel it, you'll know. Welcome to today's Intelligent Medicine Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Ronald Hopper. We're going to talk about women's health today, but also touch upon men's health because there's a fantastic new book out by one of my favorite contributors, Dr. Florence Comite. The book is entitled Invincible: Defy Your Genetic Destiny to Live Better Longer. We're going to find out what that entails. She has the distinction of having founded the nation's first women-only clinic way back in 1992. She was a real pioneer in the field of women's health, and she trained at Yale University. She has many accolades to her name. She's written previous books. Dr. Comite, what book did I interview you about the last time we spoke? It was a previous book.
It's called Keep It Up and Strengthen the Power of Precision Medicine to Lengthen Your Life. And I'm not getting it exactly right, the name, but I can give it to you in one second.
It's okay because it's all those lengthy, after the colon, those lengthy explanations. Right. We can just dispense with it.
It was about precision medicine, though. I had to argue my way into it, but it's the power of precision medicine to conquer low T and revitalize your life. Okay. So it was for men, essentially. There was an article about my work in the New York Times Magazine, January 2010. Mm-hmm. And as a result, this book emanated from that. And I wanted to write more, but it's so busy. So I was thrilled to get to Invincible last year.
Well, I was going to focus on women's health, but let's start with men's health for a moment because it's in the current events. Pete Hegseth, in an effort to, shall we say, de-wussify the American military, he's a very gung-ho, hoorah, wants to mandate, and in fact, I think they've instated this, mandate testosterone testing for every serviceman over the age of 30. I thought that 30, men were pretty okay in the testosterone department, but what say you?
Well, I agree, in fact, if it's done correctly, because men and women kind of peak between 25 and 30. And it's really in the 30s that testosterone starts falling by 1% to 3% a year in both sexes. So they'll get to women next, might take another 20 years, but so when I started this work over 20 years ago, I actually presented at a journal club. As you know, I had a triple appointment at Yale. All the endocrine divisions, reproductive, endocrine, adult, and pediatric, would meet on Fridays at noon. And I brought up the fact that people were declining in their 30s, infertility, heart attacks in men, bone loss and weight gain around the middle in women. And I said, what's going on there? And because my background was very deep in hormones and metabolism, it was clear to me that testosterone was declining. And testosterone is a critical hormone, not just for libido and sexual energy and function. Actually, I find most men complain about decreased energy, women too, but it affects libido, it affects memory, cognition. The heart is a muscle, bones, the muscle itself of our body. And so it's a critical way to look at health and sustain health so that chronic disease doesn't happen. It's tied to advancing chronic disease, which we can see under the surface decades before people actually present with a chief complaint or they're ill.
Indeed. And I wrote an article about it in last week's newsletter, the Intelligent Medicine newsletter, where I looked for the origins of this concept of testing all military for this. And it has to do with special forces, the Army Rangers and the Green Berets and the
Yes.
Navy SEALs.
Feels,
These
yeah.
guys suffer from something called operator syndrome, where it's a combination of high stress, sleeplessness, exposure sometimes to harmful environmental chemicals can be part of it, but that this has a devastating effect on their overall functionality, their well-being, their strength, their motivation. It can be associated with PTSD, but it is very highly associated with low T. So why would a young man, especially a great specimen, who is part of the special forces, begin to experience low T?
So that is related, but not exactly the issue. And it's perfectly understandable because any stressors in life, whether it's having a baby or starting a job or being under a ton of pressure or not sleeping enough, will decrease testosterone. Testosterone is the most sensitive of markers from the brain because it's what we think of as operating as a negative feedback loop, meaning your circulating testosterone is perceived by the brain. And if the circulating testosterone is low, the brain is supposed to say, hey, make some more.
Right.
What
Just like
happens
like a thermostat. Yeah.
Exactly, exactly. It's same thing as keeping temperature stable, right? So what happens instead is with aging or with any kind of stressor or trauma, and they're being exposed to all of that,
Yeah. Physical
when
injury. Yeah.
they are in their 20s even when they should be at their peak because we know sports and life itself peaks 25 to 30. If you look at the Olympics, if you look at who wins the game, everyone's shocked when somebody's 41 or 35 and they beat the younger people at what they're doing. And that's because the brain is sensitive to it. In fact, if there is a pituitary tumor that interferes with this cycle, which is called a negative feedback loop, testosterone falls, the brain says, oh, wait a minute, you need more testosterone to stay well. And the hormones are supposed to go up, something called LH and FSH, and they don't, you're going to stay at a lower level if you can never recuperate. And that's what's
This would be like
happening.
in the case of something called a prolactinoma, which is one of the reasons why men may have low T, but not the most common reason. The most
It's
common reason
usually a
is
microadenoma. Like
yeah,
so the most common reason is life. The
yeah,
life these guys are living is traumatic.
it's burnout. Yeah,
Right. It's burnout, but effectively, objectively, the axis for testosterone is the first that's visible. It's the first that's affected, being unable to get erections or maintain them or sustain your energy. And it sounds like it's pretty deliberate when you look for those forces in all of our military men.
yeah. But it also has to do with, it's very important for dopamine and motivation. And I think in order to be an effective member of the military, you have to have that oomph. You have to have that motivation, that
Yes.
drive, not necessarily to punch holes through the wall or to pounce on every hapless female who comes by, with a high libido, but it's also about the psyche.
The focus.
Yeah.
Yeah. And psyche and the ability to operate. In fact, sexual function is one of the signs of low T. And in fact, it may be wanting to keep that under control means, we're not going to make your T higher, but it's really energy and the ability to function. And the term that we don't really have a medical equivalent called brain fog, where you can't think clearly.
Yeah.
All of that, I think, is happening when men are under stress, women too.
Yeah.
But in men, it's palpable. Like we women have our cycles to hang a hat on, in effect. Men have their erectile function and the way they're able to operate, which can disappear if they're under tremendous stress, not getting enough sleep, situations that they're put into quite deliberately because of the work they do.
So back to the new book. It's entitled Invincible, Defy Your Genetic Destiny to Live Better and Longer. So there's a big argument, and I think a lot of people are under the impression that the genes are kind of like your fate. You know, it's like when you go to the palm reader and the palm reader says, oh, you have a long lifeline or a short lifeline. And, it's kind of, you get your genetic readouts. You can go to 23andMe or Ancestry.com, and it tells you this, that, and the other thing you're susceptible to, whatever, Alzheimer's, cardiovascular disease, diabetes, etc. Are we fated to experience these problems? I think your book is a resounding no.
It is, because the work I've done, which was set up scientifically as a clinical investigation because of my training at National Institutes of Health, I designed what I think of as a prospective analysis of what I think of as N of one. So part of the epiphanies I had 20 to 30 years ago when I started women's health at Yale is that each of us is unique. And if we can just follow someone's path and look at the numbers. So I'm into precision because it's about data. It's about looking at how a person is functioning in every system in their body, because we work together. The brain isn't independent of the heart. We're all in sync, and we should be. And so by looking at that, you can see changes that happen decades before people get sick. So DNA to me doesn't change in effect. It is a draft, though. And what actually changes is the choices you make, which I think of as atomic habits for longevity, if you will, being a big admirer of James Clear, and the fact that you can make differences by making small changes over time that compound, whether it's the quality of your sleep, not just the quantity, how you eat, if you exercise, what kind of exercise you do, what is the stress and anxiety in your life that may be turning cortisol on and off and causing other changes in dopamine and norepinephrine and everything like that. And to me, you can change your future health destiny by paying attention and being proactive, starting pretty young in your 30s.
Well, you could have called your book Epigenetics, but I don't know if it would have sold.
That's my next book is going to have that as the theme, because I think it's not really well understood. And you may know this, but I just heard another podcaster and somebody who wrote a book in this area talk about the fact that we have spoken about CRISPR for DNA changes, particularly in utero, right? But they're now looking at CRISPR for epigenetics, meaning the switches that we use to turn things on and off. And the reason I'm so enamored with this and still passionate after all these years is, as an identical twin, not only did I see that changes happened in the 30s, but I knew even my identical twin and I, whose DNA should be exactly alike, present differently. We have different tastes. I can live on sushi and sashimi. She doesn't touch fish. So my mercury was very high at one point. I was quite proud of it. It was the highest I'd ever seen at 38.
Oh my
I got
goodness.
it down to less than 4. My sister never had a mercury over 4. And she loves vegetables that have a lot of seeds, and I buy European cucumbers and don't particularly care for the seeds in squash. We have different disorders. She had her gallbladder out a couple of years ago. My gallbladder is fine. She was under stress. My mom was living with her. My mom, may she rest in peace, was 102 when she passed away. So
that speaks well for you.
I
By the
know,
way,
I know.
it actually is, we inherit our longevity to a greater extent from our mothers than from our fathers, correct?
Yes. My father didn't do too bad either. It's a longer story, but he was in his 90s and fully active, as both were. Both had incredible minds, and it worked up until the last minute. But my sister and I are distinctly different. And as a result, the way I look at this book is how you figure out the path you're on. And I extrapolated from the work and the research I've done the last 20 years to be able to give people the tools they need and an understanding about how to be proactive.
Indeed. Okay, folks, at this point, let's pause and allow one of our sponsors an opportunity to share an important message with you. So here you go. Please listen up.
Has your digestive health been striking out due to poor food choices, medications, stress, and other lifestyle issues? This season, hit a home run for your digestive health with Dr. Ohhira's Probiotics. Dr. Ohhira's Probiotics is a live probiotic encapsulated in small, easy-to-swallow capsules that delivers Dr. Ohhira's signature blend of pre, pro, and postbiotics. Dr. Ohhira's award-winning formula contains a prebiotic blend of fruits and vegetables, which are naturally fermented with 13 strains of live probiotic bacteria for a minimum of 3 years. The result? Dr. Ohhira's game-changing postbiotic metabolites, which are key to supporting long-term digestive, immune, and cognitive function. Dr. Ohhira's Probiotics, an all-star formulation and the best probiotic on the market today for overall digestive health and wellness. Dr. Ohhira's Probiotics, available at Sprouts, Natural Grocers, and other natural health retailers nationwide.
Thanks for listening, and thanks for supporting our sponsors. They're what make intelligent medicine a continuing free resource to you. And now back to today's guest, Dr. Florence Comite. So we talked about testosterone for men. You have some interesting views on testosterone for women. That's a controversial area because testosterone is, while used by many women and by many innovative physicians like yourself, yours truly, I've used testosterone in formulations for women, obviously, mixed with the female hormones, but a little dab of testosterone seems to synergize very well with the HRT, with estrogen and progesterone. You believe that testosterone should be part of the suite of hormones that women get.
Absolutely. If you look at the sheer numbers, even the measurements that we use as the values, we have more testosterone as women than estrogen usually circulating. Estrogen goes up when we ovulate, which is usually a couple weeks before we have a menstrual cycle. And when it does, it's high, but rest of the time, the integrated levels of estrogen are pretty low in comparison to how much testosterone is circulating. And yet, you're absolutely right. There's no approval mechanism. You have to prescribe it off-label. And again, I'll use me and another example. Years ago, when I had women at Women's Health at Yale who underwent surgery because of breast cancer, their quality of life was terrible and they wanted to go. They lost their job. They didn't feel like they looked good. They couldn't function. And I created a protocol using testosterone and blocking aromatization of testosterone to estrogen because you could convert testosterone to estrogen. They're like siblings.
Right.
And found it was immensely successful. You put on muscle, you felt good, you felt energy, you had libido. Just recently, in the last decade, in fact, Sloan started doing that in this group of women. I myself have taken testosterone for over 30 years because when I looked and really studied the data, and I realized that my family history, which portends the direction we're headed in for the most part, had an aunt on both sides, my mother's sister and my father's sister, where osteoporosis was a reason for their death.
Where there is a hereditary component, one can be predisposed, but then one can do things to overcome that predisposition.
There's very little you can actually do to kind of fight osteoporosis. You are heavily I do a lot of epigenetics and look at gene variants. And there are a lot of gene variants. First of all, of course, you can take vitamin D with K2, which will channel calcium to the bones. And you need vitamin D, which I know you know and I know is actually a fat-soluble steroid hormone. And it's important in every cell of the body. But it's also important for the immune system, for the heart. And you can do resistance training. And
by the way, I've seen pictures of you in the gym, and you're doing some pretty challenging stuff in the gym. It seems like you're a bit of a gym rat.
A little bit, I do love sports. My father also put a love of sports in us, from everything from shooting hoops to swimming and water skiing and snow skiing. So we were lucky we had that kind of investment in us. But I took testosterone beginning then because an aunt on my mother's side and an aunt on my father's side, the sequelae of osteoporosis is what really caused them to die. One had a collapse of lung and couldn't really get airway and had pneumonia. And the other one, in combination with osteoarthritis, was really shriveled up. And so I knew that testosterone was important. And moreover, I helped to bring Hologic to market, the bone densitometry analysis. And I knew my bones were already osteopenic. So my twin sister started about 15 years after me. So she's been on it about half the time. She actually has early osteoporosis, but my bones have stayed stable all these years. So while we all know that estrogen, and we believe estrogen is critical for bone, it's actually testosterone that's even more important
Right.
because men, just like women, end up with osteoporosis, but it starts about 10 years later in men than women. And heart disease is the flip of
Yeah.
that. And it has to do with the mix of hormones women have, which includes a lot more estrogen than men. And men have more testosterone. So we have better heart for 10 more years. But in the end, we all have the same disorders of aging.
Yeah. I recently, there's so much emphasis on all these new blockbuster drugs to combat or reverse osteoporosis. And some of these are pricey injectable drugs like Forteo and things like that. But I recently read a study, correct me if I'm wrong, which stated that there is about a 76% reduction of osteoporosis when you take, at the time of menopause, proper hormone replacement therapy.
Yes, you're
And
exactly.
it's not leveraged enough.
No, it's not started early enough. So at the time of menopause, you're already late into the scene. It's far better to determine your baseline bone density in your 30s, even earlier, but in your 30s, and start treatments for that, whether it's D with K2, also making sure you're doing the right kind of exercise, particularly strength training.
Hmm.
And you might need testosterone. If a woman's testosterone is less than 6, and I mean free testosterone, we tend to want it above 6 to 30. And one group that's at high risk are women on birth control pills or oral contraceptives
Which kills
because
the
there's no
testosterone.
testosterone.
Yeah.
And so there is higher degree, an increased degree. So if you have a potential for it, a propensity based on your genetic variants, then you want to be very careful. And you can see if that's in your family. Do people shrink? Do they get a buffalo hump at their neck? Do they break their hip? My father broke his hip at 70. So we knew.
Wow.
Now, I had him on bisphosphonates because we really weren't using testosterone at the time. He would have loved it.
Yeah.
I still remember joking around about Viagra with my dad and mom. So he would have loved the testosterone. But now my sister is going to be treated aggressively because she doesn't have as much muscle as I do.
Yeah.
She has better skin. She's a dermatologist. She looks great. I don't do as much for the dermatology that
But
she
in
does.
effect, that ship has sailed for her. She's already had over the many years
No,
where she
you can
didn't.
regrow bone. So the group that you just have to be careful that you look at all the parameters. That
Mhm.
includes the D with K2, that includes testosterone and resistance training and enough protein. So you want to take in at least 1 gram of protein per kilogram of body weight. And if you really work out a lot, like I do, I try to take 1.5 to 2 grams a day. Of course, you want to be careful with people who might have underlying kidney issues. But other than that, it's really quite the best way to go. My sister will catch her up. We're making her put on more muscle now, eating better. She actually weighs 10 pounds less than me, but I have more muscle.
More muscle.
I'm
So
much taller.
let's focus on that because I think an important issue these days is a better understanding of how important muscle is for overall health. It's not just to make you look awesome. It's not so that you can do tremendous feats in the gym. There are, as an endocrinologist, you recognize that there are endocrine effects of muscle. The more muscle you have, the more of a buffer it is against many types of problems.
Exactly. In fact, muscle is frequently called the organ of longevity. So let me make one connection that I think is vital and that each of us can actually try at home, each of your listeners, by getting a continuous glucose monitor. When you put on muscle, you have a way to package glucose. As muscle falls in our 30s, particularly women, we start seeing weight. Even women who have perfect bodies in a way, they've done everything exactly right. These are women that come to me and they've put on 2, 3, 4, never more than 5 pounds, but their clothes don't fit and they've always fit perfectly. They work out to beat the band. They eat correctly. They do everything. And what's happening is testosterone's decreasing. The same way they're living life with the loss of muscle means they put on more visceral fat and glucose has more of a harmful effect on them, more sugar. So the way sugar interacts with your own genetic makeup, and each of us is different. So like sugar to me is not the enemy. I have a bad sweet tooth. And so I know that. But the way I eat, so One other example is the fact that some people, a banana can cause their sugar to go sky high, but a cookie doesn't, or ice cream. And the
Yeah,
reverse
there's a
is
lot of
true.
individuality,
Yeah, so
in
that was a
glucose
study out of
response.
the
Yeah,
Weizmann Institute in
Israeli
Israel about,
researchers. Yeah.
yes, 10 years ago. Ron Siegel, I think, was the PI. And it's fascinating. And with the continuous glucose monitor that I think came to be for diabetics who no longer have to prick themselves several times a day, you can actually get a sense. You can look well on the outside, but I have people who are in amazing shape in their 60s that have VO2s and ability, endurance equivalent to a 30-year-old, and they look fantastic. They could be in GQ. And one has Alzheimer's, the other has significant heart disease. And even too low sugar can interfere with your ability to make good eggs. I just had a patient had her baby. She came to see me because her father was also a patient, and he said, "Take her first because I'm so worried. She's tried for a year and now she's doing IVF." So I worked her up, and it turns out that her sugar was too low, and the CGM is what revealed it because
Hmm.
she could wear it on her arm, and we could see what went on 24/7.
It's a
And so,
teachable moment, and you can really individualize your diet because, as you said,
exactly,
one man's meat is another man's poison, and carbohydrate.
exactly.
The glycemic index is so deceptive. There's no telling how you're going to respond to a certain food unless you
Yeah.
test it.
Because there are thousands of gene variants that control how our body internally will interact with the food. And some of it comes out of the ethnicity we have. It's not unlike, and this may be a little stretch, but it's not unlike the fact that we question. I say, isn't it obvious how powerful genes are when all three of the top contenders in the New York Marathon were from Kenya? Why is that? There's a selection process that you have to survive. So for diabetes and sugar, we have arisen from people, our ancestors had to survive tough times, whether they're the cavemen, the Holocaust, the Irish famine,
Hmm.
and the genes that passed through were survivor genes. So it was a good thing to be able to put on fat during good times and live off your body. And if you couldn't, those genes died. So we are all at risk for that. That is a absolute. I've not met a person with optimal carbohydrate metabolism because we're living longer. The antibiotics made sure of that. But we are also aging and hormones are changing. That's what makes hormones, including testosterone, so critical to our future health.
Indeed. All right, we've laid down the groundwork for discussion in part two. In part two, I want to hone in on some of the key hormones for women. And we're not just talking, obviously, estrogen, progesterone, top among them, but also testosterone and potentially other hormones that may be associated with wellness. Because as an endocrinologist, you're well aware of all these pathways, and you also have been innovative enough to kind of step out of the box a little bit and look more closely at how to optimize rather than how to merely fend off disaster.
Yeah.
Disaster medicine is what I think the paradigm is. That's clearly not your
Or
bailiwick.
sick-centric health as opposed to health. Yes, it was difficult at the beginning, Ron. I think because you're in the same category, but I got laughed at. And even though I have very solid credentials and am well published, and actually was the first to discover that estrogen has an effect on bone hormones way before tamoxifen came into being. It took a long time for the field to grow. It's been about 20 to 30 years, and we're still not completely there. So it's exciting at this moment in time when everybody's invested in staying healthy for life.
I remind you to check out the book Invincible, Defy Your Genetic Destiny to Live Better, Longer. Our guest, the author, Dr. Florence Comite. I'll be back with more of today's Intelligent Medicine podcast. I'm Dr. Ronald Hoff.